right now on Amazon, if you own a Kindle, you can download my book, Look Up, The Journey of a Soul Satellite for 99 cents. This deal will only be good until October 12th.
The shadows of storm and night, the mysteries of life and light, from unearthly peculiarities, celestial and divine, to apparitions and transcendental signs. You're listening to the Spirit Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Spirit Podcast. I am your host, Beck. Steph's got the day off today, so I'm going to be flying solo. And today was a great interview, but before I even jump into the interview and introduce our guest, I wanted to talk about a disembodied voice that I picked up in the actual interview. I'm going to play that disembodied voice for you, and I want to know what you guys think. In this recording, you're going to hear my guest say, "And he had 3 sons." And in between the "and he had" and the 3 sons, you're going to hear something. I want to know if you can hear it. So I'm going to play it a couple times for you.
And he had, 3 sons? And he had, 3 sons?
Did you hear it? I didn't slow it down, but I'm going to play it again for you, and then I'm going to play it isolated.
And he had, 3 sons?
So the EVP that came through the recording said, "I visit."
And he had, 3 sons?
Clearly somebody was visiting on our guest's end. Let us know what you think. You can drop us a message at anchor.fm/tothespirit, or you can email us at tothespiritpod@gmail.com. Our guest today is a paranormal enthusiast, a former docent of Victorian houses in the San Francisco area. She is an avid spirit box communicator. She sells vintage clothing and jewelry on Etsy and has some really fun and amazing stories to tell. So please welcome Marcy Johnston. Hi, Marcy. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing all right. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Are you guys having those crazy wildfires out there?
We are. We haven't had as much smoke, I think, because of the region that we're in. We're kind of a little closer to the ocean, so we get the marine layer kind of comes in and keeps the smoke from overwhelming us, but it's starting to spread to other parts of the U.S. now. But earlier, like about a week ago, it was that crazy day where everyone woke up and we just felt really oppressed and freaked out because the sky was basically like dark and orange and you just had like no idea what time it was. It was pretty crazy.
It's scary. I have friends out west, out in Portland. We've been saying prayers for you guys.
We can use all the help we can get. We need rain.
Feels like the end is nigh.
It really does, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am someone who's always kind of been interested in antiques and like creepy old houses and vintage clothing and things like that. Like when I was a kid, we lived very briefly, my mom and I lived in Seattle. I was born in California, but my mom moved to Seattle for a while. But she had this big Victorian house, and it was sort of dark and creepy. And I remember playing like up in the attic.
Oh.
And that kind of started my weird fascination with like old houses and creepy things. And also just being a kid in the early 70s, they had like all these monster toys, and I had the Emerald the Enchanting Witch doll, which is like a doll. Her eyes would like light up emerald green and flash. She put a battery in her back, and she had purple skin. That was like a cool toy. She had like a little haunted Victorian house carrying case that I had also. So I've always kind of been into like sort of creepy haunted stuff. And now I deal vintage clothing, so that can be interesting sometimes when I go to estate sales. And not everybody, when they have an estate sale, doesn't mean that necessarily it's somebody died in the house. It could be just somebody was moved to a nursing home, but it's interesting. Sometimes I'll kind of pick up on like people that might still be lingering or confused, or you'll just get kind of energy from a house, which is interesting. So I've always kind of had experiences ever since I was younger. Another thing with Victorian houses was a friend of mine, her mother, I guess, thought she would keep us both out of trouble. It was only my friend that was getting into trouble. We were about 14, but she thought, oh, I'm going to keep you guys out of trouble. I'm going to sign you up for this. It was through the Homes Association where we lived in San Lorenzo. And she said, I'm going to sign you up for this volunteer thing where you do X amount of hours of volunteer work, and then they'll place you in odd jobs. So I wasn't thrilled by the idea, but then I saw that there was this old house around the corner from us that was one of the things that you could volunteer for. So I volunteered to be a docent at a Victorian house, and I had some interesting experiences there. Kind of always been interested in sort of like paranormal, supernatural type things. Just had a lot of interesting experiences, but I think that house would kind of be the one that really kind of piqued my interest or gave me an experience to kind of build on everything else that I've kind of gone on to do or be interested in since then.
You mentioned that you deal with antiques, and do you have your own shop?
Just a shop on Etsy. It's Lola and Black Vintage Clothing on Etsy.
Great.
And it's jewelry and vintage clothes, and every now and then I'll throw up some crazy tchotchke that I don't want anymore, or that I found that I think is really cute, and I'm running out of rooms. I'm probably going to be listing a lot more.
I really dig that stuff. I've seen some of the stuff that you pick up, and I'm drawn to some of it, even though some of it's a little creepy. But, I mean, it's perfect.
Thanks. Yeah, it's funny because I have the gothy kind of aesthetic. Like, I like things that would be considered like sort of gothic. You know, old cathedrals and bats and spiders and spider webs and, you know, things with planchettes on them or crystal balls. And it's funny because all of that stuff is really sort of, I hate to say trendy, but it's kind of trendy right now. And like the whole witchy look is very trendy, but I've always kind of been interested in that.
It is, but it ties into your fascination with the paranormal, so it works.
It does, but it's funny because it's like a duality with me, because I like that kind of stuff, but then I also like really bright colors and textures and like fun clothes. So like with the vintage, it's hard for me to just stick to like one particular look, because a lot of people are very like streamlined as far as what they have in their shops, and they're very heavily curated. And with me, I'm just like, oh, this is cool, I'm gonna buy it, put it in my shop, and, you know, put it up for sale and see if anybody else likes it as much as I do. And I'll find stuff that's just absolutely wacky. So it's always nice when you get somebody who appreciates it and they're like, oh wow, this is so cool, thank you so much for finding this. Kind of a nice feeling to...
Well, you had the fascination since you were young with all things kind of spooky and paranormal. And you did live in a Victorian home. Was that Victorian home haunted?
You know, I mean, maybe. I was really young, though, like really. I mean, I was like maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, something like that, like in that age range. So really young. So I have really vague memories of it. I just remember it being very shadowy. I remember they got me a toy piano, and I would like this attic for whatever, I don't know what I was doing hanging out in the attic, but I remember being in an attic, very specific memory, and like maybe that was where I was allowed to play because I could spread my toys out all over, I don't know. But I just remember being up in this attic and someone telling me, play the piano like Liberace, and just kind of banging my hands on this little toy piano. They're like, you know, play like Liberace, and I'm like, bling, 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 but I'm like sitting in this like dark, shadowy attic doing it, so it's like one of my earliest memories.
When did you find yourself when you were actually stepping into it voluntarily and kind of drawn to it more? That's interesting too, because it took me a really long time. Like, I don't know why, but it didn't really occur to me that just anybody could go out and ghost hunt. Like, it wasn't something that I thought like, oh, I can just go out and try to communicate with dead people, or, you know, try to find out what's out there. Like, I didn't realize that that was just something that you could do. And it's funny because a friend of mine had a coworker, and the coworker and her boyfriend would sometimes, or maybe it was her parents, but they would invite people. They would go on these gourmet hikes. So they would go on a hike of like, you know, maybe the area around Mount Tamalpais or something. Okay. Or they'd go to like Angel Island. Like, we're going to do a gourmet hike. We're going to spend the day on Angel Island. And so the interesting thing was the lady who, you know, her parents put everything together, her boyfriend that she lived with, he was really into ghost hunting. And this was like, I want to say this was like the late 80s or early 90s. His name is Mark Bacuzzi. He and his wife are the founders of the Windbridge Institute. They have like accredited mediums, so they sort of vouch for them and vet them. And then you can go, okay, well, this medium is accredited by the Windbridge Institute. So it's something that they do. I don't think that they charge for their services or anything. It's just something they do as part of their research into the afterlife. So not necessarily like the paranormal, because I know like when I knew him back then and then we would go on these hikes, one of the hikes we did was on Angel Island, and we went through the immigration
center, which Angel Island was like an immigration detention center for all the Chinese that came to California after the gold rush. So after the gold rush, we were horrible, the poor Chinese people from mainland China. We basically told them, like, come to California and help us build our state. And they helped us with the railroads and things like that. And we treated them like crap. Basically, like, they came here and they helped us and they worked really hard. And once the gold miners were out there staking their claims, they didn't want, like, Chinese miners. They just were afraid that, it's kind of like what you hear now, the rhetoric, like, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our women, we don't want them. So they were really terrible before Chinese, and, like, we sort of went in these waves of, like, inviting them to come and then sort of rescinding the invitation and being really hostile. And that's sort of what happened with Angel Island, is so many Chinese immigrants started coming that they built this center to sort of detain them, to decide what to do with them, like whether or not they were going to have them here or send them back. And people actually were detained for up to 2 years. And so some of them committed suicide in that, and you can feel it. Like, when you go into certain parts of that, I'm getting chills talking about, you can really feel it. Like, when you go into certain parts of that immigrant detention center, it feels really heavy and really sad, and it just makes you want to start crying. It's really a powerful experience.
That is sad. I have heard a little bit about that, and I did know that there was some Chinese slavery, particularly on the West Coast. I think it ran from Seattle down, but it's very sad.
It's sad, yeah. I mean, just the fact that we sort of invited them. We said, hey, come and help us. We need people to work in the fields, and we need people to work on the railroad, and we need people who are experts in this and experts in that. And so they all started coming, and then it was like, whoa, there's too many of you, slow it down. And yeah, it's just terrible what we did. And not only that, but we put them in these wooden barracks for the detention. It was like these wooden structures. And so they were very offended by this, because in their country, it's like, you don't sleep in a wooden house, a dog sleeps in a wooden house. So it was very, like, offensive to them, and they just felt like they were being treated worse than a dog. And they wrote poetry. They scratched poetry into the walls, and the poetry was, like, covered up by paint. And the army was going to tear everything down. I think it was in the 40s. They were going to tear everything down, and then they discovered all these poems. And it was like, oh, no, now this is, like, culturally significant. We can't tear it down. If you ever come out this way, that's definitely, like, something to put on your list.
I bet you it would feel similar to Gettysburg. That has a lot of energy there.
I've never been there, but I could imagine. Well, I could imagine that would be like 100 times more, because so many people died.
You definitely feel it.
Pain in Gettysburg.
Yeah, you feel that wave of energy that comes right up through your stomach, and just standing in certain areas. Did you do any exploration and actually do some ghost hunting on the island, or any kind of work?
It's tough, because it's one of those places where you go from, the ferry takes you over there, and it's like maybe from 9 a.m. and you have until maybe like 4 p.m. and then everybody gets back on the ferry and leaves. If you don't get on the ferry, then you're stuck on Angel Island overnight, and there are no stores or anything. So I think it's possible to camp there, but I've never been brave enough. It's pretty big, so it'd be hard to kind of get around from place to place. There are a lot of structures still standing from, like, the military. The oldest Civil War buildings still standing on the West Coast are on Angel Island. So there's some stuff there, too. There's some stuff in the Civil War buildings. There's some stuff in the detention center. The interesting thing was, I did bring a spirit box with me when I went with a friend of ours, and my husband and I, and then this friend, we all went over there for the day, and I took my spirit box. And we were in one of the buildings with the Civil War buildings, and I was running the spirit box, and a man came through and said, in Chinese, he said, ni hao, and then he said, hello. So that was kind of trippy, because of the history of the detention center that was on the other side of the island.
Now, you've been into ghost boxing and spirit boxes for a while. I know we've been friends on Facebook, and we have a lot of groups in common, and we both have this affinity for ghost boxes and ITC and EVP. I know you have a pretty good collection. When did you start getting into EVP work? Any
person can, like, do ghost hunting. I didn't really start to get into, like, the EVP thing and the ghost box thing until 2014. I've been doing it for that long. Maybe 2014 was when I started. I bought one of the PSB 7s the really loud, horrible, noisy PSB7. And it was funny because a lot of people hate on Steve Huff, and he's controversial, so I won't go too much into him, but like it was funny because I read an Amazon review that he did for the PSB7. I was like, he actually did a pretty good review of it. Like, I'm pretty convinced. I bought one, and the thing that was interesting was the house that I'm going to tell you about that I sort of volunteered at for a while when I was 14, there was this opportunity with this historical society to do a 2-night investigation. And so, like, my husband and I were like, well, we could celebrate our anniversary by going out to some fancy dinner, or we could spend the money on the tickets for this 2-night investigation and check that out and see what that's all about. So the group that was doing it, American Paranormal Research Association, they're based out of Southern California. And one of the guys, it's funny because now he's on Ghost Hunters, Brandon Alvis, he was one of the people that sort of led the investigation. And so he and a couple other guys led this investigation of this house, this Victorian farmhouse that I had been a docent at. And I was actually, I don't want to get ahead of my story, but I was actually kind of terrified to do a ghost hunt there because of my experience. I was like, ooh, I don't know, do I want to do this? But I did it, and it was sort of, I don't want to say it was like life-changing, but it was definitely something where, you go into it not knowing if anything's going to happen, and then something crazy happens, and you're like, wow, and then you get hooked,
So when you were a docent there, did you have experiences before you did this hunt? It sounded like you kind of had something jarring.
Yeah, so basically I was 14, and, knew nothing about nothing at that point. You're naive when you're 14, at least I was. And my friend, I think she volunteered also, but I was never volunteering at the same time as her. And it was really weird because it was like we signed up through the Homes Association for this volunteer work. And it was like, okay, just show up on this day. And they didn't make me wear Victorian clothes or anything. It was just, I show up, and there's 2 other docents that were a little bit older than me, but not much. And they didn't really give us any guidance. They didn't say, like, here's the history of the house, here's what you should tell people. So the 2 other people, the 2 other teenagers, were sort of walking me through what they normally do and what they normally say to people. But at that point, it was like you could almost wing it. I mean, you could almost make up some crazy story and just take people room to room and just say whatever you wanted, because there was literally like no training. So, I would just be like, here's the dining room, and here's where they ate, and here's the living room. And there weren't many people coming in to see the house. And at that point, they didn't charge admission. So it was like on a donation basis. And so we would be bored because there was literally just nothing going on. So it was like, you've got 3 teenagers in an old house. And so we would just sort of walk around and like open drawers and look in them and play around. And, one day the guy, it was like myself and a girl and an older guy. And, one day the guy comes up, he's like, do you want to see some pictures of a dead baby? Wow, is that a thing? Like, I didn't know about, Victorian mourning customs at that point. So I was like, wow, okay. But yeah, we would just sort of go and sort of poke around, which, looking back was pretty awful, but it was also pretty awful to be a docent with like no training, no guidance, no adults. My experience was, and I'll tell you a little bit about the family that had the house. It was, I think they were originally a Scottish family. So the patriarch of the family was named Neil, and he had, 4 sons and a daughter? I can't remember. I'm terrible. I know there was Archie, I think there was Neil Jr., and there was John, and there was Mary. So he had 4 kids. So basically, Neil died, and the oldest son inherited the house, and everybody sort of lived in it together. So the son named Neil got married, moved out, lived somewhere else. There was another son named Archie, and Archie died in this horrible accident. I believe he went over railroad tracks with his horse, and they were towing some farm equipment, and something spooked the horse, and the horse threw him, and then the farm equipment like ran over him. And so he didn't die right away. He died, like he was in horrible agony, and he died like in the house. And he was young and good looking. Like all the girls in the area were like in love with him. So he's like this really young, good looking guy. So he died in the house. I'm getting goosebumps telling you about this. So he died in the house. And then the sister Mary, she died probably in her, I think she was in her early 50s. But she never married. She never had kids. So, when they would take people around the house, they'd say, oh, and this is the spinster's room, Mary is the spinster daughter, which I always thought was really messed up.
It is.
Yeah, it was really messed up. And then the other son, John, the one who inherited the house, okay, so he got married, and his wife was named Florence. And from what I can make out, just from my experiences in the house, that Florence and her sister-in-law, Mary, were really close friends. They became very close friends. John was kind of, I want to say he was a little wacky. Supposedly there was like a legend in the neighborhood that he lived to be 100. So I'm trying to think of it. The house was built in 1888. So he lived a long time, and he left the house to, I don't know if it was the Shriners, it was some association, and they were actually ready to pull the house down, and then they decided to save it, which is, I mean, I'm glad they did. It's a really nice house. It's not a huge Victorian house, but it just has a nice, kind of a homey feel. Anyway, so John was kind of a character. So he was kind of a perv, basically. And so I guess as he got older, he would stand on his porch, and there'd be girls walking to school, and he would actually be out there in a robe, and he would open his robe and flash them.
Nice.
So that gives you a little background on John. When I was at the house, I was bored one day, and I was, interested in the Victorian clothing. I went upstairs, and I went into Mary's room. And at that time, Mary's room had sort of like a velvet rope, and you weren't really supposed to go past the rope, but I did because, there was nobody around. So I went past the rope. There was a cape on display that was just sort of laying out on the bed, and it was like a jet beaded mourning cape, and it had monkey fur, and I had never seen anything with monkey fur on it before. So I was like, wow, what is that, interesting texture? Because monkey fur that they used to use in Victorian clothing is sort of like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's sort of like long and spindly. I guess it's got an interesting texture.
Is it pubic-like?
No, it's not. So it's just weird. It's like very long, and it kind of clumps into these strands. So, they would put it along like the edges of a cape or along the collar. But it was definitely interesting. And I don't remember if there was like a muff that was also made of monkey fur, but I just wanted to touch the monkey fur. I was like, oh, I want to see what that's all about. And so I stepped closer to the bed so that I was probably in the center of the bedroom, and it wasn't a very big bedroom. And I stepped into what I now would refer to as a cold spot. And it wasn't just cold. I went like ice cold, but I also felt like I was going to black out. And I had never felt like that before. Like I felt like I was just going to completely lose consciousness. I felt sick. Like I felt sick to my core. And I felt like I was going to black out, and I felt cold. And I actually had to go back out of the room, and I had to go and sit down downstairs until I felt better. And I remember like someone else was like, are you okay? Because your face is really white. I was like, yeah, I don't feel good all of a sudden, and I might have to go home early. And I was like freaking terrified of that house after that. I felt like someone knew that I was going in there to touch the thing that I shouldn't have been touching, and I went beyond the rope, and they were like, nope, nope, you don't go back. You don't go this way, and don't touch that. It was almost like I walked into a spirit or something. It was not a pleasant experience at all. It was not a good feeling.
So did you go back to face your fears years later for that hunt?
Yeah, I kind of did. I kind of did go back to face my fears, because I don't remember. My memory is really hazy on whether or not I continued to volunteer there, or if I was just kind of like, "Ooh, I've done my community service." And I can tell you that the jobs that they placed me at were absolutely terrible. I don't know if you've ever seen the Bart Simpson cartoon where he like does all these chores for an elderly woman, and then she says, "Here's your nickel," but it was pretty much like that. So.
Yeah.
Like never again in my life am I going to do something like this. So yeah, I went back sort of to face my fears, and just because I knew there was something there, and I had never really heard anybody else talk about it. Whereas, some of these haunted locations, you've got people saying like, oh, the Winchester house is so haunted, and they sort of build on that reputation so they can charge you $50 to walk around. But this house did not, at that time, like that I knew of, this house didn't really have a reputation as being haunted. So I thought it would be really interesting to sort of go there and see if I sensed anything or if I felt anything. Because I had even gone back there with an ex-boyfriend of mine, and we just kind of took the tour. And he said like he felt like the pictures were watching him, but that was all he really felt. But I know that for me, when we were waiting to take the tour, we were sitting downstairs, and my arm touched the wall, and I got sort of this sick feeling when my arm touched the wall, and I was like, oh no.
It knew you were back.
It knew I was back. And so the interesting thing was the first night of the investigation was at this house. It's called the McConaughey house. So the first night, didn't really know what to expect. So I brought a recorder and a spirit box. The guys, the APRA, they were leading the investigation. So they kind of did all the they did all the stuff that, like, you know, I now know enough to do, like, on my own. Like, I don't really need to go with a group. But, you know, they were doing all the things like asking questions, setting up a recorder on the bed, and then everyone would sort of stand around the bed and ask questions and wait for an answer. And they were running the spirit box. So I didn't really get to use my spirit box because they were running theirs. And they had the same one. They had the PSP7. So it was really interesting, though, because we were hearing responses come out in real time. I didn't personally see it. I think it might have been Brandon that saw it, but supposedly they hang out a lot in the attic. So when we were on the second floor, I think it was Brandon that saw Archie. So Archie was the young, good-looking son that was horribly mangled and died a few days later in agony in the house. And they saw him standing, like, on the steps to the attic, and he looked at them and he said, "What the fuck are you looking at?"
Wow.
Yeah. So he seems to be a bit angry. My experience that night, a couple really stood out. The thing that really kind of cemented for me that, yeah, there's something else out there, and this house definitely is very active, was that we were in Mary's room. And so here I am, I'm kind of shivering a little because I'm in Mary's room, and I'm remembering how sick I felt when I stepped into that cold spot. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, do I want to be in here? Everyone was sort of grouped around, and we were doing an EVP session. So there was a recorder on the bed, and people were asking questions. And I think somebody, of course, threw out the inevitable, like, why didn't you ever get married, or why didn't you ever have children? And so, you know, it's kind of like a fine line. Like, sometimes it's okay to ask questions like that, but it's like, these are people that don't know you. It'd be like asking a stranger. You're asking someone that you don't know. You're asking them all these personal questions. And it's really kind of a breach of etiquette, especially for Victorians. They're, like, really big on etiquette and formalities. And so I don't remember what question triggered it, but I remember I was standing kind of in a corner. It was not a very big room, and there were about 10 people. And so I was standing sort of between there's like a doorway and then the corner of the room, and I was sort of wedged in the corner. And a question was asked, and behind me, bear in mind I'm in a corner, there's nobody behind me, there's no room for anyone to be behind me. Behind me in the corner, I hear this woman let out this sigh of just exasperation and frustration. She was just like, oh, and it was so loud. I'm getting goosebumps telling you. But it was, like, really loud, and I just got, like, a chill, like, all over my body. And everyone stopped what they were doing, and they were like, did you just hear that? You know, we heard the sigh. We heard her kind of yell out, oh. And so when they played back the recording, this is the most interesting thing, that sigh of frustration was not on the recorder.
Oh, isn't that the way?
I know, right? But it was crazy because I was like, I heard it. Everybody in the room stopped what they were doing. Everybody in the room heard it and turned around. They were like, what the hell? And I'm like, yeah, it was right behind me. And so it was Mary. I'm pretty sure it was Mary. And she was like, oh, I've had it with you people, you know. Get out of my room. So that was really interesting to me, and that really kind of solidified for me, like, okay, yes, I did experience something here. Like, there is something here. I'm not crazy. You know, she's still here. They're still hanging out. The whole family was basically hanging out in that house.
And you went back in even after feeling like you're going to pass out.
Oh, yeah. I went back, and it was funny because I don't know if I still had the EVP, but I remember listening back to the recordings I made, and it was really strange because at first I wasn't hearing a lot in the 2 nights that we did. And then I went back and I kind of listened again, and it was almost like I had to really turn it up and put headphones on. But I think I might have been in her room, and I heard a lady say, "You're very much afraid of me." And she sounded very regretful, like she could tell that I was afraid of her because of my experience. And that, I felt bad about that afterwards. I thought, you know, now that I know she's just a person like you or I mean, there's nothing to really be afraid of.
Well, fear takes over, right? And we just misinterpret everything when we're in that moment.
It's definitely like that fight or flight feeling too, the adrenaline that you get when something like that happens and you're not expecting it. Yeah, I mean, I think that she was actually like a really nice person, and Florence seemed like a really nice lady. I've been there during the day and just turned a recorder on, and they've come through and said things that were kind of funny. Like once I had my recorder on, or I thought I had it on, and I was asking questions, and then I happened to look and the recorder was off, and I was like, oh God. And so I turned it back on, and I went in to tell my husband, like, hey, you know, I was asking all these questions, and I thought my recorder was on, and it wasn't. And the funny thing is, when I played that part back where I said, oh, I thought my recorder was on, you can hear a lady go, it isn't. I mean, I think she meant to say it wasn't, but I think maybe time is just different for them. It's not as linear as it is for us. And they also came through. I remember that investigation. We were up in the attic, and they had the spirit box on, and they're asking all these questions. They were asking Mary how she died, and she said she wasn't sure. She said she couldn't recall, but she thought it had something to do with breathing. And I think I said, was it pneumonia? And she said, perhaps. And then we were saying, like, is it Mary, is it just you? Are you there with Florence? And you hear these ladies' voices say, together, like they were there together. So that was really interesting. Yeah, there were some really interesting direct responses. The guys that were running the investigation, they had done other investigations at the house and talked to people that had experience. And I was told I'm not the only young girl that had like a weird or sort of bad experience, because I guess they think it might have been John. And he would actually like grab or pinch girls. So there were other women who were made, or girls, younger, like teenage girls, that were made to feel really uncomfortable, or they might have gotten like pinched or touched. I mean, I guess I'm lucky I didn't get goosed or something, but I just got like the bad sick feeling like I wasn't supposed to be in that room and I wasn't supposed to touch the monkey fur. But he said, like, I guess that, there were other people that had sort of negative experiences. Like, it wasn't a positive experience. It was like a negative feeling. And so he was asking on the spirit box, who's the spirit that's making these girls feel uncomfortable? Who's doing that? And this voice came through and it said, careful, he'll get you. Like, They were joking. So, yeah, I mean, they definitely have a sense of humor. I do love that house a lot. And the spirits there are great. It's like the whole family just seems like a dysfunctional family with a sense of humor.
Definitely a good intro to being a docent.
Yeah. So I did that, when, like I said, when I was 14, and I didn't really think much more about volunteering. Let's fast forward to like 2004. I moved to Redwood City, and there's a house in Redwood City. They actually just moved it not long ago. They decided to build, they decided to build like condos or apartments or, luxury $4,000 a month one bedrooms or something. And so they moved the house. It's been moved. This is, I think, its third move. It might be even its fourth move. I'm not sure. But it was a house built in the 1860s, I want to say. And the style is Steamboat Gothic. So it's this house with like very pointy gables and a pointy roof, and it's a 2-story house. And it used to be, it's always been like free to go in and tour it, and a docent will lead you around and show you around the house. And I remember years ago going in there, and I remember it being a certain way. And it's funny because when I went back in to tour it, it didn't look the way I remembered it. But I think at the time when I had gone in there years ago, it was like they had just opened it as a house museum. They had just finished restoring it, and so they might have made some changes. It was owned by several people. So the Lathrops were the people that built it originally, and then they only had it for like a couple of years, and they sold it to somebody else. The last person that owned it was a sheriff.
Okay.
And the sheriff, he seems to be really attached. He's still there, basically. So he was sort of the last person to own it, and he was the one that had the house. Sheriff Mansfield is his name. And he had the house moved from one location to the location where it was until a few years ago. And I think now it's in the parking lot of it's the San Mateo County Museum. That's like a courthouse. So they basically took like the city hall and courthouse and the old building, and they used the parking lot, and they moved the house into its parking lot. So I'm not even sure if you can tour it right now. It might still be closed. So I was just bored one day, and I figured I'd go check it out. And I went by myself, and there was a lady showing me around, and she was showing me around the house, and I wasn't really getting any vibes or anything. And I went upstairs, and the minute we went into the master bedroom, it was another one of those things where it was like, it wasn't a positive feeling. It was like a negative, uncomfortable feeling. My ears started ringing. My ears were ringing, and I felt kind of sick. Like, I felt like somebody doesn't want me in here, and they're pissed off that we're in here. And so the lady's like totally oblivious. She's telling me about the bed, and here's how they tighten the straps on the bed, and that's why, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. And she's showing me how you would like tighten the ropes on the bed, and just showing me different features of the room. And I'm in here going like, how can this lady stand to be in here? Because like there's something in this room that absolutely does not want me in here right now. And instead of leaving, when the tour was over, I went back upstairs by myself, and I got my phone out, and I tried to take some pictures of the room, and every picture I took came out blurry, like it wouldn't focus. And then I tried recording. I think I had a recorder in my purse, and I tried recording, and I got a man saying, I'm telling you to get out of here. And he was like, he sounded mad, like he sounded pissed off. So I was like, holy crap, this house is haunted. I remember telling a few of my friends about it, and this was like, I was kind of already into ghost hunting, and a couple of them started going over there, and then one person inquired about doing a ghost hunt, and this kicked off like this whole slew of investigation. So there were a few people that started doing ghost hunts there and like charging money, and I mean, it was nice because the house was like a free tour, but they could use all the money that they could get, so it was nice for them because they were making a little bit of money on the ghost hunts. But that was definitely an experience there, and I decided it would be interesting to volunteer there. That house, there's been like people just have gotten like crazy EVPs there and just weird energy, and most of the activity for me though is in that bedroom where the sheriff told me to get out. He's a funny guy. Definitely possessive of the house, like even though he's like the third owner, he definitely feels like it's his house and his place, and he doesn't want people bothering him.
I mean, I can understand. I can understand.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think that a lot of people that ghost hunt even think of it in those terms ever.
Yeah, they kind of have that attitude like, hey, entertain me. Like, I'm here to be entertained and scared, and
exactly.
I want you ghosts to entertain me. And they're disrespectful, which I don't like. I think it's always good to be mindful, like, you're just speaking to people just like you that you can't see. So ask like rude or disrespectful questions, or just like demand that they do something. And
sometimes they ask completely stupid questions, like what color shirt am I wearing? What and they go, and it's just like, have some respect.
Yeah, well, that's also why I don't like to do like, you know, when they do like investigations that are just sort of open to the general public, because people always you just get these people, they either don't know what to ask or they ask questions like, what should I have for dinner tomorrow? And you're like, really? You think spirits care about what you're going to eat? Like, come on. Right. Like, nobody cares. Yeah, inane questions are always kind of a pet peeve. But no, so I decided to volunteer at this house because it was down the street for me at the time. It was within walking distance, basically. And I thought, well, it's kind of cool because it's like a house that's haunted. And so it'll be interesting to kind of volunteer there and see if I sort of have any other experiences. You know, during the day, I mean, it was funny because the lady who was like the main docent, she didn't want anyone else volunteering to know that the house was haunted. Like, she didn't want it to get out because she was afraid that people wouldn't want to volunteer or to be docents. And it makes me mad because it doesn't work anymore. But you know the app Ghost Radar?
Yeah, it doesn't work anymore?
It's pretty much trash for like the Ghost Radar part is just a joke. But the dictionary, it doesn't work on my phone anymore. It used to work. I would sometimes have the dictionary running to see if any relevant words came up. And once I was sitting there with two docents, and they were talking about different kinds of birds that they had had. Oh, I used to have a parakeet, and someone else was like, oh, I've always wanted to have a gray parrot. And all of a sudden, the Ghost Radar app came up, and it said birds. And I'm like, uh-oh, I better put that down, because like I don't want them to know that I'm doing this. But it was just funny because we're talking about birds, and it just went birds, like all of a sudden. So it's got a lot of EVPs there, orbs, weird experiences. There's a woman who hangs out on the staircase. I remember I was in a warehouse that we were investigating, a warehouse in San Jose, and we're just in the warehouse, and I was joking around, and I said, okay, spirits, I said something like, get back to work. Like, time for you guys to get back to work. And when I played it back, it's really creepy when you hear the lips moving.
Oh, wow.
But I could hear you could hear the whisper and you could hear the lips moving. When I said, like, get back to work, they were like, you suck. But it was funny because they said, we're stuck here, it's boring. And you can hear the whisper and you can hear the person's lips and their mouth moving. You can hear somebody go, we're stuck here, it's boring. You can hear the sound of the mouth. I'm talking to you, like my mouth is it's that
the breathiness, is that what you mean?
The breathiness of it.
Have you ever done a session in a hospital?
You know, I have. I've just like turned on the recorder on my phone or something, but I haven't actually done like a spirit box session in a hospital. I'm almost like afraid.
I've done one in like not an abandoned hospital, like a working hospital. And I popped my headphones in and decided to just turn on an app and just let it run in my headphones. When I left that night, I had to walk through a dark parking garage. I heard the screaming like a woman was being murdered. And I was scared. I was like, I have to get to my van. Like, there's a woman getting murdered in here. I was horrified. And as I'm walking to my van, there was a couple that had walked right by me. Like, they didn't hear that scream. I don't think I'll ever do it again.
Yeah, I don't. That's one thing. Like, I'm just afraid because I think when people die in a hospital, they're probably like really confused. my great uncle was in like a hospice type place. He started to get dementia, and they put him in a nursing home. And then something happened. I don't know if he fell, but he got worse all of a sudden, and he had to go to this hospice place. And so I went there with my husband one night. I didn't want the guy to die. He was like a really cool guy when I was a kid. He was like he was like the great uncle that would say, "Hey, come over here." Like he's going to tell you a secret. And you go and say, "Hold out your hand," and he'd put like a stack of like 50-cent pieces in your hand or something. And he just always like a really sweet, nice man with like a good sense of humor. Like it was just really kind of terrible to see him decline. And he got to the point where he kind of didn't know who anybody was. And so then he's in this hospice place, and I went to go visit him, and his daughter and granddaughter were visiting him, but they were like, "Oh, well, we're going to go to the cafeteria, so we'll give you guys some time with him." So I went in there, and I'm in there with my husband, and my husband felt kind of awkward, so he's kind of hanging back. And I'm in there, and he's like, he didn't have a shirt on, and he kept pulling like the blanket down, and it was winter, and I was like, oh, he's got to be, I wonder if he's cold. And so I was trying to pull the blanket sort of back up for him so he wouldn't be cold. And I swear to you, he was the only one in the room. He didn't have a roommate. I heard a woman's voice say, "Just leave him alone." It's like, oh, just leave him alone. Like, don't pull on his blanket. Don't try to cover him up. Just leave him alone. And I was like, wow, there's nobody else in the room, but I heard that like clear as day. I don't know who it was, and I kind of wonder if it was I had a great aunt that died before I was even born, and she was one of the first people to get open heart surgery. She didn't make it. She didn't survive the surgery. So sometimes I kind of wonder if it was her, because it wasn't a voice that I recognized.
But it seemed like as though it was somebody looking out for him. It didn't seem like it was...
Yeah, there was something, because they always say, like, your relatives are kind of around you before you die.
Yes.
And he died, like, 2 or 3 days after that.
Yeah, the visitations begin.
Yeah.
But that's just amazing that you heard that.
Yeah, I heard it, like, it was like a person in the room say, "Why don't you just leave him alone?" And I was like, okay, is there somebody here? What's going on? It was just a regular voice. It wasn't a whisper or anything like that.
What's the scariest that you've ever come across?
That is... Okay, I'm going to preface this with, I'm not religious, so I'm not like one of those heaven or hell people. So I don't believe like, ooh, the devil, like, because my mom had made a comment when I started doing all this. She's like, oh my God, like if ghosts are real, that means hell is real. And I don't really believe that, one sort of proves the existence of the other. Coming at it from that angle of saying like, I've always been a little more of an atheist than anything else. And now I would say I'm more agnostic because I genuinely do not know. Basically, I stayed at this hotel in the Gold Country, and I've stayed there a couple of times since this happened. So it wasn't enough to put me going back. Basically, it's an old gold rush hotel, so it was built in the 1850s, and the guy that built it was, I can't remember, he was a German immigrant that also spoke French because he lived in like an area where, they kind of spoke both, but he came out and he sort of catered towards the French community. The hotel is the Hotel Leger, but there are sort of arguments about, like, did he call it Leger, like Leger, or was it Leger? So no one can sort of agree on the original pronunciation, but the guy's name was George. And so he was sort of the proprietor and the founder of the hotel. Supposedly he haunts the hotel. There's supposed to be some other creepy entities that are at the hotel. And of course, there's always like the story of someone came with a Ouija board and they summoned a demon, whatever for that, like whatever for summoning a demon with the Ouija board. I spent the night at the hotel with my husband, and we stayed in room 7, which was supposed to be George's room when he was alive. It's a really small room. Some of the other rooms have a bathroom in the room. But this room, unfortunately, the bathroom was sort of right across the hall, so you had to have a key to get into the bathroom. We went to bed that night. They actually will leave. I don't know if they still do this because the hotels change owners like 3 or 4 times. They used to leave the unoccupied rooms open so you could go in and ghost hunt. And they give you that silly ghost detector thing that's just like a thing with a light, it beeps. And, but we had our own equipment anyway, but we'd go in the rooms and ask questions. And I got a lot of them telling me, like, fuck you, get out, fuck off, I don't want to talk to you. And they were all, like, really kind of hostile.
Like, fed up.
But, so this is, like, the second time we stayed there, I think, that this happened. So we're in room 7, we go to bed, and I didn't have a hard time falling asleep. Like, sometimes at haunted hotels, like, it's hard to fall asleep. But I was fine, I went right to sleep, and the only thing that woke me up was my husband rummaging around the room, because it was a small room, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? He's like, well, I really need to go to the bathroom across the hall, but he's like, I can't find the damn key. So he's looking around the dresser and looking under the dresser and pulling out the drawers to the dresser. I think it only had like 2 drawers in it. But he's like, you know, I put it on top of the dresser before I went to sleep, and now it's not there. So I'm looking around. I'm looking under furniture, and I'm looking in my bag that I packed and in my purse, and I'm dumping everything out to see if it fell in there. Nothing. No key, nowhere. So we've like torn everything apart, no key. And I'm like, well, this is just great because you woke me up, so now I have to pee, and now you have to pee. And we knew there was like a bathroom downstairs next to the saloon. There's sort of like the lobby, and then there's like a saloon and restaurant, and there's like public restrooms. And so it's pitch black. We had to go downstairs in the pitch darkness. I think we might have been the only guests at the hotel that night because it was like an off night or like off season. So we go down there in like the pitch darkness to use the bathrooms that we knew were unlocked, and totally creepy vibe. I'm walking through the dark going, okay, thanks guys, this is really funny, like really hilarious to make us go through the dark to use the bathroom. You know, the next morning we get up, the key's not there. We're like, well, that's kind of weird. So we told the hotel, we're like, we're really sorry. The key just kind of disappeared, and they didn't seem that shocked. They were like, oh, well, you know, it happens. And they said, you know, if it turns up again, they had one of those keychains on it that says, like, if found, return to us, and you just drop it in the mailbox. They were just kind of like, you know, no big deal. If you find it, great. If not, no big deal. That was like I think we checked out on a Sunday night, and a couple days later, I think it was a Tuesday, I decided to go do some thrift shopping, and so I went clearance outlet that I go to or used to go to, and, you know, digging through clothes. And so I had to drive my car to get there. And so I had my purse with me and my keys. I, you know, obviously had to take my keys out of my purse to go to the thrift place. And I was digging around for a couple hours, and I said, okay, it's time to go home and get some lunch. And so I went to get my keys out of my purse to get in my car. The key to the hotel was on top of my car keys. And I mean, there's absolutely no way that was in my purse before, because like I said, I had turned my purse upside down looking for the keys. I had my keys out, and I drove to the shop, and then I put my keys back in my purse to shop. And then sometime between my keys being put back in my purse and me going to reach for my keys, this hotel key just mysteriously reappears. And so that was kind of like, okay, this is weird. Like, am I going crazy? Maybe it was in here before and I didn't see it. And then I'm kind of like, but how could that be? Because it just didn't make any sense. That's weird enough. So I get in the car, and I have like the Bluetooth set up with my phone connected to Bluetooth, and I'm driving along, and I'm like, this is really weird. I'm going to tell my husband about it. So I call him over the Bluetooth, and I'm waiting for, you traditionally would hear the phone ringing as the phone starts dialing. Instead of hearing the phone ringing, I start hearing water. Like, it sounds like I'm underwater. Like, I hear this sort of sloshing back and forth of water and these sort of bubbling liquid sounds, and then I hear whispers, like this, that kind of thing. And it oh God, I'm getting horrible chills. Okay, so I hear these whispers, and they start getting louder and louder, and it just sounded like, I hate to say it sounded evil, but it didn't sound good. You know what I mean? Like, it sounded creepy, and I'm hearing the water sloshing, and I'm hearing the whispers, and I'm like, yeah, this is the wrong number, and I just hung up. I just hit disconnect. I hung up the phone call. I decided, like, enough was enough. That was the creepiest thing. And then I was like, that was just the weirdest freaking thing. I'm like, let me redial and see if it happens again. So I redial, and my husband picks up, and he's like, hello? And I'm like, yeah, I just had the weirdest experience. And he was like, well, he's like, did you just call? And I said, yeah, I tried to. And he's like, well, all I heard was coughing on the other end, like somebody going, he didn't hear any of the creepy shit I heard. And not only that, but after I got off the phone, one of my ears was like burning. It was burning, like the side of my face and my ear were burning like a sunburn. I mean, it was literally like, I don't believe in demonic things, but it was like, to me, that was the most creepy and pseudo-demonic thing that's ever happened. And I'll tell you exactly why. The water that I heard, I realized later that it was the same sound that I heard when I was about 12, and I was at the beach with my mom. We were at Santa Cruz, where they have the boardwalk. And my mom used to take me to the beach once in a while. I mean, she's a single mom, and so we didn't really do like a lot of extravagant things, but every now and then she'd drive down to Santa Cruz and take me to the boardwalk, or we'd sit on the beach and we'd have a slice of pizza and sit on our towels and get a tan. And I remember going into the water and body surfing, because somebody showed me how to body surf, and I was doing that for a while. I got knocked over by a wave. and it was a big wave, and I blacked out for a bit because I sort of like remember just opening my eyes and I was tumbling around and around in a ball. The water was just throwing me around, and I was just tumbling around and around, and the sound of the water, like I've never forgotten that sound of the water sort of slushing and gurgling and swirling around me. It was the same bloody sound that I heard over the Bluetooth speaker.
That sounds pretty damn evil to me.
It was pretty awful. And so just realizing that, like, this is something that's somehow new. Like, that was the closest I ever came to dying in my life. It somehow took that sound and did the creepy whispers over it, and it put the key in my purse, and I was like, no, I don't like this. That's probably the creepiest, scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
I think that's the thing with demonic, is that they mess with your mind.
Yeah.
It's psychological.
Yeah. It's not necessarily what we would traditionally think of as a demon. I think it's more like spirits that are just mean. Like, they're just doing it to be mean. Because I think, and I could be wrong, but I feel like they can sort of see, and like, we're an open book for a spirit. It's like they can just see everything. I mean, they can probably tell you what color underwear. They've actually told people I know, like, hey, you're wearing pink underwear, pink panties. So, I mean, they know. Like, it's almost like they can X-ray see through you or something, but they can also sort of see into your soul, which sounds crazy, but I really do believe that they know everything about us. They know what we're thinking. They know what we're feeling. Like I said, energetically, I think we're kind of like an open book.
They use that energy and they feed off of it, so they can manipulate it.
Oh, yeah.
They
always feed off the fear.
Think of it in terms of, like, that we've got bad people on the earth, and just imagine this twisted pedophile that dies, and he's in your home, and he's haunting it, and you're living
totally.
with that. So you're gonna feel like somebody's staring at you, and somebody's doing not so nice things. You're getting goosed, you're getting touched, and that's scary.
It is scary, but then at the same time, you have to think that these people were human, and it's like you have to find the humanity in each spirit. Like, even if they're a jerk, you just have to try to find the humanity. That's the way to not be afraid of them, is just to realize, like, these are people just like us. Like, they're assholes, sure, but they're just people. And I think they might feed on negative emotions or fear or strong emotions, but I also feel like there are spirits out there that are willing to sort of come between us and the bad ones and sort of protect us. So I don't think we're ever completely on our own. I don't think we're ever completely on our own with these jerk spirits. I think there are always other spirits that are sort of around that are sort of trying to steer us in the right direction. And
yeah, they're bouncers.
I don't know if they're necessarily guides, but sort of like that sort of concept of someone who's sort of guiding you along and trying to keep you out of trouble.
Yeah, they give you nudges, and I think they act as bouncers at times, and I've heard them fight. I've heard someone not so savory come into the conversation when I'm working with spirits, and I'll hear, the spirits I trust and know, they'll say it. They'll say, you need to get out of here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they'll tell them, get out, leave her alone, don't touch her. What's really creepy is when I hear things like, I heard one once say, open your mouth, and I heard the other one saying, get off her. And I was like, oh, hell no.
Oh.
Like, I'm really glad I can't see what's going on, or I couldn't see them, because, like, it just sounded like it wasn't good. Whatever was happening was like, nope. Honestly, it doesn't matter, though. I mean, they can see through your clothes. I mean, they don't really, you have no privacy, basically. I don't think it matters, like, if you're on the toilet, in the shower, wherever you are, like, they can come and look at you. It doesn't matter. So, I mean, I think you just have to kind of put it out of your mind. They can see you and just be glad that you can't hear what they're saying. Because I've had them say plenty of stuff about me. It was funny, though, because one of them called me once in a session. One of them said fat this or fat that, and I got pissed off. And then I did another session, and it was kind of sweet because I still have the clip somewhere, but they said, you're fat but beautiful. Then somebody else goes, they're stupid. And then somebody else goes, yeah, Angel, they're stupid. So they were, like, reassuring me. Like, even though one of them, the ones that called me fat, they're like, oh, those guys are stupid.
Yeah.
You're fat, but we still think you're beautiful.
Yep.
I thought that was really sweet.
Yeah, so it goes both ways.
Yeah, they see the whole package. I mean, what was funny? Once I got a comment, we were investigating one of the casinos in Reno. This lady she used to run the ghost hunts for Bay Area ghost hunters. She did a ton of them, and then she stepped down from doing it because somebody else had sort of taken a hiatus and decided to come back. So it was like, well, there can't be two. There can only be one. She stepped down from doing it, but for a while there, she was doing, like, just ghost hunts constantly. And she invited us on her birthday, I guess, the Silver Legacy Casino in Reno. she said she had investigated it before, and it was active, and so she invited us to kind of come up there and stay in one of the rooms, and we stayed, and like we did a ghost hunt, and like I got this funny EVP when we were going in the stairwells that kind of go between the floors. I was saying like, oh, my backpack's really heavy, and I'm going to take my backpack off. I was saying it to myself out loud, and you hear somebody go, that will not be enough. I'm going to take my backpack off. And he goes, that will not be enough. I'm like, what, do you want me to take off more? I guess that's what they meant. Like, it's not going to be enough. And another time I was on the Hornet, the USS Hornet is like really haunted.
Yes.
The one that's docked in Alameda. And I was doing an investigation on the Hornet, and I was wearing leggings, and I didn't have any underwear on underneath, because sometimes I do that when I'm wearing leggings. And so I was going up these stairs, and they said something about me, and you hear this man go, and it's funny because they use the resonance of my footsteps on the metal stairs, but you hear a man go, pantyless, apparently.
Oh.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem fair. It's so one-sided.
I know, right? It's not like you can see that. But there's another house where I was a docent called the Ringstorff House, and it's in Mountain View. And it's another one that's like free to enter, but it's kind of a bummer because it's a neat Victorian, and it's sort of that Italianate style, but only the lower floor. Now, it's a 2-story house. It's not very big, but only the lower floor is open for tours. And so I got really bored really quickly being a docent there, because you're just sitting in the dining room waiting for people to come in. And then sometimes they would all come in at once. People would bring their kids, and their kids would be like, trying to pull the Victrola apart or something. So there were only a few rooms I could take people into. And basically, like, I think a lot of people just thought like they could walk in and look around, and they didn't expect to be taken on a tour. The lady that was sort of in charge of the docent program, she had really kind of stringent things. Like, she really wanted us to talk about, we had a specific script we were supposed to follow. So you couldn't just sort of like, do improv and just talk about, the house. Like, you had to have this specific set of things that you were supposed to tell people about. You could just sort of see people's eyes sort of glaze over. Like, they didn't really want to hear it. And every now and then I'd get somebody, somebody would ask me, like, is this house haunted? Are there ghosts here? And I'd be like, the lady that was in charge of the program, she'd be like, once I thought I smelled like a phantom smell, but it was actually just somebody's chewing gum. And I'm like, okay. But I had like really, really minor experiences. Like, I did my first tour on my own, and somebody patted me on the head. Somebody invisible, like, patted me on top of the head. And I got a few EVPs. Like, I'd go in there a lot and try to get them to talk to me, but I think they might have been afraid that I was going to start bringing people over to investigate or something, because the spirits were pretty quiet. There was one time when it was Halloween, and I brought some chocolate bars, and I left one on the mantle, and I put my recorder next to it, and I heard somebody they touched the recorder, they kind of tapped it with their finger, and then they sort of rustled the paper on the chocolate. I definitely had like a confirmation that there was somebody in one of the rooms, like, tapping on the recorder, and it wasn't a living person, because it was completely, pardon the expression, on Halloween it was completely dead. There was like nobody there, because Google was like right down the street, and they were having some Halloween thing for their employees, and you couldn't even get through. Like, I was like 2 hours late for my docent time slot because the traffic was so bad. So there were really no people coming in to visit or to look around because they couldn't get there.
Right.
So it was basically me by myself, like, okay, my shift is from this time to this time. I guess I'm just kind of stuck here. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to because of all the traffic. So I was just kind of in there like, okay, well, I'm just going to put a recorder down and record. And so, yeah, I've gotten a few responses there, like on the spirit box when nobody's there. But overall, like, I would say of the 3 houses that I volunteered at, that the Ringstorff is actually the least haunted. And I mean, that might be different if I was there at night by myself, because in the winter, when it got dark at 5, and I'd go with the lady who was sort of like in charge of everything, and she'd be going through the house turning the lights off and locking the doors, and it felt different. Like, after everybody left and the lights started getting turned off, the house felt different, like the energy kind of changed. So you could tell they were kind of hanging around. They weren't quite ready to come out and have their spirit party just yet, but they were waiting for us to go home.
Yeah, the freaks come out at night.
One time she told me that, because they had cleaners that would come in, and she said it was really strange, because she said usually the cleaners were really good about like locking everything up, And she said that she got an alert because all the lights were on and the door was left unlocked, and the cleaners just left. Like, they stopped what they were doing and they just left. So there must have been something that freaked them out. That house actually had a reputation for being like creepy haunted when it was abandoned. Bikers used to ride their motorcycles up and down the stairs, and the poor house was vandalized. So there supposedly, like, Sylvia Brown came through, and she said there was like an angry man in a wheelchair, and I have no idea who that would have been because it wasn't Mr. Rangsdorf. He wasn't ever in a wheelchair, and I picked him up sometimes, but it was more like there were a few female spirits that would communicate with me, and they were pretty soft-spoken. So I never really got anything bad there. I felt like they were pretty friendly. And I would also get kind of like feelings that they wanted me to do things for them. I got this overwhelming feeling that they wanted fresh flowers in the house. And I found out later that one of the daughters that lived there, and she was the one who sort of stayed behind to sort of help her parents. And so she was a little bitter about that, but she got married later in life. She married someone that worked on the farm. But I think she was always kind of mad that she never got to kind of go out and do her own thing, that she had to help her parents. Because there's a picture of her upstairs, and she looks mad. But she was really into botany and gardening. So I didn't know that when I was like, oh, I think someone in the house wants like fresh flowers. And it turns out that this lady, Elise, was really into botany and gardening. So she might have been the one that was sort of putting it in my head that she wanted the fresh flowers. I don't know.
Did you bring her the fresh flowers? Did she ever get them?
You know, I try to remember if I ever got a chance to bring flowers in or not. Because, I mean, there was like one docent who was an elderly man. He got really dressed up to do his presentation, but he was one of those people, you couldn't interrupt him, and you couldn't change anything in the house, or like everybody would freak out. Like, they had a phonograph, and it was kind of funny because I felt like I always was trying to do things that I thought the spirits would like. So I thought maybe like they were probably tired of hearing the same phonograph record over and over. Here I am thinking like, okay, I bet the spirits are like totally sick and tired of hearing the same freaking record over and over, because, you know, people would come in and you go, oh, and here's an old phonograph, and you had to say things like, you couldn't just say like, oh, here's a phonograph from, you know, this is from the 20s, the house was built in the Victorian era, so this isn't contemporary to the time the house was built. But, you know, you had to say things like, we don't know if they had a phonograph, but they might have had one in a house such as this, and then wind it up, turn it on, play a record for 3 seconds, everybody goes, ooh, and then you like, there's like these little cabinet doors, and then you say, and this was the way you controlled the volume, and you open the cabinet doors and it gets louder, and everybody goes, oh, you know. So I just thought like, I bet these spirits are like, can we never hear this record like ever again? So I looked in the cabinet below the phonograph, and there were all these other records. So I was like, cool, I'm going to get out another record and put another record on the turntable. So then I found out later, I went to this like event for all the docents, and this one lady was just like, I don't know what happened to the record. I had it all set up, and now there's a completely different record. And it was like, it had just like destroyed her life and like sent her into a tailspin because I changed the record. So
what did you put Hendrix on or what?
Yeah, it wasn't anything like that, but it was like, oh my God, it was so shocking that someone actually like change the record. And I think I admitted, I said, well, you know, I kind of just wanted to change it because I felt like it was just the same record over and over. And everyone was like, well, I didn't even know there were any other records in the phonograph. Like,
they would have changed it a long time ago if they could have.
I've had some weird shit happen over the years, and it sticks with you, you know?
It does. Thank you, Marcy, for coming on to the show and giving us all your wonderful stories. And before you go, tell us where to find your goods.
Oh, yeah. Thank you again for having me. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you. And for anybody that wants to check out vintage clothing and jewelry, men's and women's, it's going to be lolaandblack.etsy.com, or just look for the shop Lola and Black, spelled just like it sounds. I named it after my 2 cats that are no longer with us. Lola, LOLAANDBLACK, Lola and Black.
Beautiful.
That is the name of my shop.
I hope to have you back on, and thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
To the Spirit
Podcast.
Supernatural Science.
Aliens. I'm ghost.
Psychic. Mystic.
Spirits.
Divine Source.
Heaven.
The dead.
It's magic.